Jesus was an unknown quantity. Other than calling a few fisher folk to follow him, his public ministry has yet to really begin. It's in this context that he enters a synagogue and starts to teach. At least in Mark, this is his first public teaching. While we don't know what he taught, whatever it was delivered with a strange and unexpected authority. There is apparently an unexpected power in Jesus' teaching. And this is unusual, not something that people came to expect from those teaching in the synagogue. He spoke with power and clout. We are told he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Now, we might be tempted to see in this an insult to the scribes, as those who were, by comparison to Jesus, ineffectual. Some have seen this not just as an insult to the scribes, but by extension, an insult to the whole Jewish faith, as they are all wanting in this passage, according to some. I believe this is overly harsh and unnecessary. In the Gospel of Mark, scribes are often opponents of Jesus, but there is at least one good scribe in chapter 12. Scribes are not inherently and necessarily villains in this gospel. The point is not that the scribes are false teachers or anything like that. The point is rather that Jesus is a surprisingly powerful teacher. Jesus was an unknown figure when he entered the synagogue. And yet the synagogue leaders invited him to teach, allowed him to speak from whatever their version of a pulpit was. So they are not his enemies. In this instance, at least at this point in the story, they are his allies. They're inviting him to teach. And the people coming to the synagogue, well, they had a certain level of what to expect from what they heard. And Jesus is operating on an entirely different level from what they have come to expect. Now, while this is all happening, immediately, the word is not translated in the NRSV, which I read earlier, but immediately, euthos is one of Mark's favorite words, just immediately this and immediately that. Immediately, in the Greek, there is a man with an unclean spirit. Immediately. So he's been there all along, and all of a sudden people, oh, look who's here. Or did he just enter? We don't know. But things are moving quickly all of a sudden, and Jesus must react to the unexpected. The man with an unclean spirit cries out in the middle of Jesus' teaching. Now, we Anglicans, we love good order and decency. This is kind of one of our trademark deals. It's what we love. We love when everything has its place and everyone knows what it is. Our services can become shrines to good order, and all this is fine as long as we realize that Jesus did not come into the world to save the religiously well-ordered people. I remember sitting in the cathedral downtown, probably, a decade ago or so, and I remember a little boy of 6. I was quietly being spiritual and meditating and stuff, and this little boy of 6 was just tearing back and forth during the service. And I remember thinking, oh, their parents should control that child better. Getting all irritated. Now, of course, as I thought about that after the fact, I realized that my thoughts are entirely wrong and wrong-headed. If we want young families to join us, which we do, then we should rejoice when the confusion of little ones is in our midst. We should not be irritated by it. It should be something that we thank God for. In any event, back to the Bible. I'm not saying this little boy was possessed by a demon, although this man in the synagogue is making a scene. He's acting entirely inappropriately. But this is what people do who have been neglected or damaged by society and by family, by friends, by what have you. And it doesn't seem that inappropriate behavior bothers Jesus one little bit. Maybe bothers everybody around him, but it doesn't bother Jesus. He doesn't cringe out when the man shouts, "What have you to do with me?" If you come to destroy me, I know who you are. Just all these prodding little words. Jesus is just not fazed. The man or the spirits in the man are afraid because they have nothing in common with this Jesus. He's on a totally different level than them, and they have nothing in common. And because of this, because Jesus is just so different, the man or the spirits in the man or whatever are sure that this Jesus has come to destroy him. They are terrified by Jesus' strangeness, his holiness. I ask myself sometimes where the voice of the man and the voice of the spirits, where one ended and the other begins. The image of demon possession is an interesting one, I think, to consider bracketing out the actual reality of demon possession, but as an image, it presents a nice picture of authenticity or inauthenticity, a real life, an engaged real life living out of your truest self, or a false life. Now, I'm not saying that everybody, I'm emphatically not saying that everybody who's living in an inauthentic life is demon possessed. I'm just interested in the parallels. There's some interesting parallels. When we separate ourselves from God, from the Spirit, we create a whole new identity. It's like we become a whole new person, what I would consider to be our false identity. And this identity is not really you. It's not really who you are. It's a fake you, if you will, even if you might be persuaded by it. And this is terrifying to this man here. I'm, of course, using this psychological parallel, if you will, because Jesus is fully authentic and fully present at that moment. He is holy while this man is scattered and unclean and just dissipated. And in this fragile state, this person is terrified that Jesus is going to destroy. And our false selves, my false self, and my personal conviction that something we all have to deal with, is not a rare thing. I think everybody has this false ego self that they create or are born with or wherever it comes from, something we all deal with. But that false self, I don't think, can really get the notion that God really loves us. And it's much more comfortable by creating a fear narrative that God's out to destroy us. And this fear narrative can become very compelling, very believable. Surely God hates me. Surely God is wanting to destroy me. And the presence of Jesus here can only mean bad news for me. It can only mean destruction. And how does Jesus respond to this? Jesus says, be silent. And I think a better version, the versions in the Bible are often a little bit tidied. I think a better version is shut up. Jesus has no interest in debating with our false self. He has no interest in arguing with us when we're living inauthentic lives. Rather than quarreling with our false selves, Jesus is far more interested in bringing us back to our truer selves. That's really what Jesus is wanting to do. And Jesus, regardless of what this man is telling himself, Jesus does love this man more than this man could ever think or imagine. He's not going to debate with the man. He says, rather, shut up and come out of him. So it's this man who entered the synagogue and disrupted the services, the man who made all the well-ordered religious folk deeply uncomfortable, this man who did not know how or did not care to act appropriately. It's this man who goes home whole. It's this man that comes back to himself. Jesus did not destroy him. Jesus rather restored him to his real self. Now, what became of this man? Did he become a follower of Jesus? Did he go and do something else? Mark isn't interested. That's not the point of the story. Just Jesus came not just necessarily to make followers, but to bring health and wholeness. But we do know that the others in the synagogue, including the disciples, those who were following Jesus, they all began to ask what I would call the Jesus question. The all-important question that we can never completely answer, but Just asking it can bring wholeness and health and interesting mystery back into our lives. Who is this man? What kind of authority is this? What kind of power does this man have? Now, the Jesus question remains. The power of Jesus is here today, just as it was at that ancient synagogue so long ago. And if that story from the synagogue is any guide, it is likely those among us today who feel broken and unworthy who will taste of that power today. And of course, the good news is that we're all broken and unworthy. Strange good news, perhaps, but welcome to the world of Mark. The good news is that even when we rehearse to ourselves and to each other our fears and convince ourselves over and over that God has come to destroy us, Jesus is against us, even as we tell our distorted woe of paralyzed fear over and over, the good news is Jesus is not fooled, and he's really not interested. He's not even listening to that story. He's got a better story for us. His love banishes all the shadows of those false narratives, just drives them away. And Jesus knows, even if you don't, but Jesus knows at the heart of your story, each one of you, is love, a love between God and a human, a love that beckons all of us humans to behave better towards each other. And that love of Jesus is here today, inviting all of us to figure out what it means to live better and truer versions of ourselves. May it be so.